Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Autism Mastermind podcast. I am Melinda, and I am here with my friend and co-host, Vanessa. Good morning, Vanessa.
Good morning, masterminds.
Today, we have a hot topic today, Vanessa, because here in California, we have
Mhm.
something called in-home support service, or we'll refer to it today as IHSS. And we have someone on today that is going to explain a lot to us about IHSS. Vanessa and I are both participants,
Mhm.
which is great for our families. And we'll learn a lot today from James. So please welcome James Diskint from IHS Law. Hello, welcome, James.
Yeah,
Good
welcome
morning.
on.
Good morning. Thank you, Melinda and Vanessa, for having me.
Yeah. Yeah, we'd love to learn a little bit more about you and how you got into this specialty to help service clients in the area of IHSS.
Sure. So my youngest brother has Down syndrome, and my middle brother and myself, as well as my family, it's been a collective effort through the years to make sure that my youngest brother receives the right services and the right supports to help him thrive. So I kind of saw how hard my parents fought on his behalf. And ultimately, it led me to disability law. And I knew nothing about the in-home supportive service program when moving to Los Angeles around 6 years ago. It's a fantastic program, as I guess you both know firsthand. It helps hundreds of thousands of families in California be able to keep their loved ones safe at home.
Yeah.
So I started a solo law practice. It's called the IHSS Law Office of James Diskint, PC, and I help families across the state qualify for the in-home supportive services that they deserve.
Yeah, thank you for doing that because as we were chatting before we started the podcast, there are so many inconsistencies and one thing that people don't understand, like you had said, is that we typically think, oh, this worker coming to my house, they must have a degree in social work and they must specialize. And you shared with us that they're actually just county employees. So a lot of times people, parents might feel like, oh gosh, this professional came to my house and they denied me and they might feel overwhelmed to appeal. But
Yeah, I
could you
mean,
make
can you explain to us
yeah
what
IHSS is, and then
is
we can
for
get a
all
little
of our
bit more.
listeners? We have listeners around the world, and I
Mhm.
know that some of them are in California, but
Yeah,
people might wonder, like, what is it?
yeah.
Do
What
I
is
want
it? How
to,
does it work? Yeah.
right? Do I want to move to California?
Sure. So before I answer that, let me just give
Yeah.
a general disclaimer as a lawyer. As a lawyer, this is kind of
Yeah, no
part of
problem.
the course. I have to give my disclaimer, which is that the information I plan on sharing is not legal advice, and that it may be inaccurate and outdated, which I hope it is not, but that's the disclaimer, and listeners should consult an attorney for advice regarding their individual situation.
Yeah,
Exactly. And Vanessa and I are parents, and we're only relaying information.
yeah.
We are not
Always remember
professionals,
that.
Vanessa. Vanessa, not today. Today
We're
we are not
professional
professionals.
talkers for sure, but yeah.
Yes,
So to answer
100%.
your question, what is
Sure.
IHSS? IHSS stands for In-Home Supportive Services. It is a California benefits program designed to help people of all ages live safely at home. IHSS pays recipients to hire a personal caretaker, including a family member, to assist with activities of daily living.
Hmm.
To be eligible for IHSS, you need to be a California resident, qualify for Medi-Cal, and should be at least 65. You need to be at least 65 years old, disabled, or blind. IHSS is an alternative to out-of-home care, and it's administered by county welfare departments under the authority of the California Department of Social Services. So the intention of the program is to keep people at home rather than in some type of institution. And so it's really a very noble cause, and allows, as I mentioned, hundreds of thousands, close to 1 million residents live at home through the care of either their loved one, or they can hire a caregiver. So IHSS pays up to 283 hours per month for various services. The hourly wages differ per county.
Yes.
So that means that a parent, relative, or other caregiver can potentially earn more than $5,000 a month assisting their loved one at home. And so there's a range of in-home supportive services. I can kind of quickly go through, the list
Sure.
without going into all the explanations. But as I mentioned, they focus on tasks of daily living around the house. So there's services for meal preparation, meal cleanup, routine laundry, shopping for food, respiration assistance, bowel and bladder care, feeding, dressing, menstrual care, ambulation, transferring, bathing, oral hygiene, um, repositioning, assistance with prosthetic devices. There's transportation services to and from medical appointments, cleaning services around the house or yard cleaning. And then there's a service called protective supervision that I'm gonna hopefully spend the most amount of time discussing.
And
Yeah,
I
Um,
think we should say that you get the hours. I mean, there's a whole assessment process.
yes.
Correct.
So there's a
There's
whole,
a
and we
whole
don't have to
assessment
go, yeah, we
process.
don't have to go into the assessment process, but it's basically like, for example, myself, I get hours for Paige. And it's so that she doesn't have to go and live somewhere else. I want to keep her at home. But also, I cannot work a full-time job if I'm taking care of her at home. So it's things that we're doing that are above and beyond what you would do at that person's typical age, correct?
100% right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's something called the age appropriate guideline tool
Okay. Yeah.
that the California Department of Social Services has for minors under 18 to determine, as you mentioned, whether
Mhm.
the services that the minor requires is above and beyond that of a neurotypical child the same age. So, I'm sure all parents would want to get, funding for, grocery shopping for their kids, but obviously that's not what the program
Yeah.
is about.
Yeah.
And so there is a chart essentially that the state has to determine
Mhm.
which age the state considers a neurotypical child of the same age to be able to do that task
Mhm.
independently or with assistance.
Can
Right.
they, is
And
that found on your website if people wanted to see that chart? Do you have links to it on your website? Or if not,
Yeah,
we can link it in our show notes.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, if you go on my website, IHSSlaw.com, and you go to my blog, it's probably in multiple posts. One is
Mhm.
what is IHSS? Another post is how to get more IHSS hours, and that
Yeah,
information.
and that's the thing too, is the older your child gets, the more hours that become
Yes.
available to the family.
Correct. And one thing I recently had heard in a local group is it used to be that as a parent provider, one of the incredible things is that you are actually not taxed on your income,
Income.
which is wonderful. But another thing, it used to be that you couldn't work a full-time job plus be the IHSS provider, but I've since found out that no, that does not apply. Like you can be working a full or part-time job and still be an IHSS family provider, correct? Or could
Yes.
you clarify that for us? Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's been a recent rule change.
Mhm.
Oh,
That's
I didn't
helped a
know
lot of
that.
families out.
Yeah. Yeah, because that used to be limiting for me because I spent 20 years working a part-time job and that was partly I stayed part-time because my son's needs are so high, but also because I thought I couldn't go over the 30 hours a week. So, let's be real. I mean, a lot of our kids are up all night long, so we're easily putting in those hours. So,
We're definitely not putting
yeah.
in, we're putting in more than 283 hours
Yeah.
a
So,
month.
I guess this kind of leads us into like, could you share some common challenges or issues that you see your clients facing as far as IHSS and qualifying or getting the needed protective supervision that some of the clients do need?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I help families um, uh, exclusively with one service called protective supervision. It's designed for folks who lack safety awareness due to a mental impairment. And so the issues I see regarding families trying to qualify for that service called protective supervision, one common issue is that families are often confused about which behaviors can qualify someone for protective supervision.
Thank you.
So that's one issue. Another issue is that, in my experience, the most common reason that an applicant gets denied protective supervision is because they don't have enough documentation from reliable sources.
Mm.
Because it's a state benefits program, there are cases of fraud, unfortunately, where people are trying to apply and get benefits when they don't actually deserve it. So kind of as a result of that, the state really relies heavily on documentation that you have.
Mhm.
So that's just an issue that I help families with essentially in every case, is to try to get the right documentation from reliable sources. Another issue that comes up all the time for protective supervision is that families often struggle trying to get their young children qualified, and we kind of alluded to
Thank
this,
you.
that
Yes.
the younger the child, the harder it is to get services, in general, especially for protective supervision. One of the reasons for that is because one of the requirements for protective supervision for a child is that the child must require more supervision than a neurotypical child of the same age.
Mhm.
Yes.
So, naturally, the younger the child, the harder it is to establish that the supervision is needed based on the child's mental impairment rather than his or her age.
Mhm.
So that's a common issue I help families with. And another common issue is that I think just across the board, generally speaking, families are, in my view, not prepared enough for their assessments. And perhaps they put too much faith into the county social worker's evaluation.
Mhm.
As we discussed, the county social workers are generally not licensed social workers. They're county employees who, serve as gatekeepers for the IHSS program. We had discussed that prior to the recording that, there's a high turnover rate. And in my experience, there's just been a lot of inconsistencies, with how the program is administered and applied. And that can be a very frustrating process
Yeah.
for families. But oftentimes, though, it means that their loved one is not being evaluated properly.
Mhm.
So I think it's really important for families to be prepared, for their assessments.
Initial assessment. That's the thing that I tell people all the time. It's hard when your kids are younger and you're
Mhm.
just new to all this. It's very difficult, but it's like I say, facts and documents outweigh stories, because it's like like we were talking about, they're county workers. So if you don't have facts and documentation and you're just telling them a story, because guess what happens? Every time that the worker is at your house, your child is an angel.
Not my son. He was like, I'll never forget when we first did it. I was trying to talk to the county worker, and I was also trying to watch my son, and he just was like, oh, you clearly need protective supervision with this one. It was like, but that doesn't mean that happens for everyone, because
No.
you were right. Like, your kid could be having a great day and sitting right by you and being super sweet, and then they don't see your day to day. So
Right.
what would you recommend? Like a running log, like a Google sheet, videos? Like, what are some of the top things that you would recommend families do to make sure things are documented properly?
Right. So I'm glad you mentioned behavior logs. That's actually something I feel very strongly against, just based on my experience. And I'll tell you the reason why, which is that one of the requirements for protective supervision is that the dangerous behaviors are occurring frequently and unpredictably.
Mhm.
And, those are kind of broad descriptions, but in my experience, frequently means at least once a day at unpredictable times. So what I've seen with behavior logs, I would say 95% of the behavior logs I see from parents is that, understandably, they don't document nearly all of the dangerous behaviors.
Mm.
And so what ends up happening is that they're actually undermining their own case by submitting evidence that is going to conflict with their testimony at the hearing. So, for example, if they're claiming that, their child is, say, trying to wander away from home 5 times a day, and then that's their testimony at the hearing, and then they submit a behavior log that says, and that documents the behaviors over a couple of weeks, and say the behavior log only documents the wandering away behavior occurring, once every few days, the judge is going to say, your testimony can't be believed because we have this behavior log that says that your child isn't wandering away so frequently. So it's nearly impossible, I think, for parents, understandably, to document every dangerous behavior that occurs. Another misconception that happens, that whether it's on the behavior log or from testimony at a hearing, is that parents often focus on isolated incidents of when their child gets hurt, which obviously are, the most traumatic incidents, but for protective supervision purposes, what the judge wants to see is the attempted dangerous behavior. So when you're trying to document, the frequency of a dangerous behavior, parents often overlook how often their child attempts the dangerous behavior. So every time the parent has to redirect the child from engaging in a dangerous behavior counts as the child attempting to engage in that dangerous behavior. The child does not have to actually fully engage in behavior and God forbid, hurt themselves for that to count. So that's another issue I see with behavior logs, is that they're only documenting the times, say, that their child actually leaves the house, not all the times throughout the day that they have to be redirected from
Right.
wandering outside. So I'm really not a fan of behavior logs. Ultimately, another reason is that it's just an extension of the parent's testimony, which in my experience is given very little weight in these cases. Unfortunately, you'd want to think that, as a parent, better than anyone, which you do, what's happening with your child at home. But again, the problem is because there's cases of fraud, and the state wants to ensure that its funds are only being spent on the cases that deserve it, is that really the cases come down to reliable documentation. So, I help families try to get reports from teachers, therapists, doctors, really, reliable third parties who have observed their child, and, who can write letters, or perhaps there's already reports, an IEP or an IPP from the regional center. Those are the most compelling documents in my experience, because they're not necessarily prepared for the hearing, and they would be expected typically to be documenting the child's dangerous behaviors.
What do you think? What do you think about that having a good 24-hour plan on the initial application?
That's a required document, but I don't think it's it's pretty straightforward. I don't think that particular document is given so much weight. It's just, I think, meant to see who is caring for the child during 24 hours of the day.
Right.
But I don't think that document is heavily relied on when the county or the state, through an appeal, is evaluating protective supervision.
So you'd see that more just as something good to have on hand. So if let's say you as the parent provider can't provide anymore, then the next person coming in knows what the child's or adult's day looks like. That's kind of what I've always done. It had a running one for weekdays when he would be attending school or therapies, and it looked a little different versus a weekend day. So that's more just to have on file, doesn't hold a lot of weight when trying to get and apply for services. So thank you for sharing that with us. That's really, that's all really important information. And like you said, stuff so if parents want to gather information, contact your professionals and third parties, which I think, that does hold a lot more weight. And also when you're a parent and you're in it, it's really hard to see, it's hard to see every little thing because you're in it all the time and that's your normal. So thank you for sharing that. Do you have any success stories that you could share with us that stand out, where you've seen a family come in and they were, their ability to get IHSS and protective supervision was challenged, but you were able to help support them and get them the services needed?
Especially for parents with kids with autism, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, certainly. I feel very rewarded to be practicing in this area, because that essentially is every case that I take on, is that typically parents come to me when they get denied services, although I also assist with initial applications and reassessments
Oh, good to know.
to help families, try to qualify right away. When I started my practice, I was kind of focusing exclusively on the administrative appeals when someone already got denied, as well as something called a writ petition, which is after someone's had an administrative appeal through the California Department of Social Services. Then I can appeal the agency's decision in Superior Court. It's a way of keeping the agency accountable and getting the clients the services they need, even after the agency denies them. So initially I was focusing on those types of cases, but then what I found is, lots of families were calling me for help with appeals. And when I was reviewing their case to determine whether I could assist them, I was reviewing the documents that they had already submitted to the county for either their initial assessment or for their reassessment. And, I was finding a lot of inconsistencies in their documents from what they were telling me. So there's not much I can do then when those documents are already submitted and part of their record. So that's why I decided to also help families with their initial applications, assessments, as well as reassessments to, help them submit the right documents from the start to give them the best chance of succeeding and not having to go through an elaborate appeal process. So, thankfully for every case, really, it's pretty rewarding helping getting families the services they deserve. There are a couple cases that stand out in particular that I'd be happy to share. So there's one case involving a young woman with autism. We can call her Emily, although that's not her name.
Right.
So Emily was denied protective supervision for around 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so this was the county had completely ignored Emily's dangerous behaviors, which included some pretty severe ones, including headbanging and scratching herself and wandering away from home, to name just a few of them. So this was a very compelling case that I felt strongly about. Emily's mother was a single mom who had always had to provide 24-hour supervision to Emily. And she wasn't able to work a full-time job, and she was doing this without being compensated, by the IHSS program. So the first thing we did was we submitted an administrative appeal. And, we claimed that the county wrongly denied Emily protective supervision for the last decade. So generally speaking, you only have 90 days from the county's notice of action, which it issues after the assessment, to submit an appeal. But these notices of action that the county had provided Emily's mother were not legally adequate, which means that they failed to provide the relevant information to her regarding its reason for denying protective supervision. And so therefore, Emily's mother was never able to make an informed decision whether to appeal. So we had our administrative appeal, and the administrative law judge ultimately denied our appeal. And so that was disappointing for Emily's mother and myself, but then we filed a writ petition in Superior Court challenging this administrative decision, which resulted in favorably for us. The outcome of the writ petition was that the court allowed us to continue the case and have the county reevaluate Emily for protective supervision for those 15 years that it had, in our view, improperly denied her. So that was a very positive outcome. So then we, go back to the county for a reassessment, and we have lots of evidence over the past 15 years of all the reasons why she deserves protective supervision. I can share some of the facts of the case because they're very compelling and somewhat disturbing, I must say. And I think the reason I'm gonna share them is because I've seen this happen, unfortunately, in many cases, not just this case, where the county will sometimes twist a fact.
Yeah.
They'll twist something, to try to show that the claimant has, better judgment than we're claiming. Because one of the requirements is that they lack safety awareness due to a mental impairment. So the county is always trying to point to facts that show that the claimant has better judgment. But in this case, there was a couple, pretty appalling examples that the county attempted to twist in its favor. So one of those examples was that Emily was, a teenager, maybe 16 or 17, and she had Facebook, and she was communicating to a stranger online. And unfortunately for Emily, she decided to meet up with the stranger. The stranger had asked her to bring a passport as well as her, like, either birth certificate or driver's license, something, highly, highly suspicious, obviously, that someone, with good judgment would never do. So unfortunately, Emily met up with the stranger. She was kidnapped for a few days.
How scary for the family. Gosh.
Incredibly scary. The police were involved. So, we're presenting the police reports to the county, and at the end of it all, I mean, this was just probably one of the most shocking, appalling things I've seen in my experience. The county claimed that this incident of Emily getting kidnapped, and sadly, she was also sexually assaulted during this event.
Oh, what a nightmare for her mom. God.
A complete nightmare. The county claimed that this episode demonstrated Emily's good judgment. Why? Because she's able to maneuver Facebook on her own, and she's able to meet up with someone on Facebook. So, often in these cases, it seems that occasionally the county social worker perhaps has worse judgment than the claimant does. It was very, disturbing, understandably, for the parent to read that in a denial letter from the county. So that was just kind of one example why the county denied the reassessment. So then after all of that, we appealed the county's denial. We had another administrative appeal, which is kind of how the case started. This time we won the administrative appeal.
Nice.
And Emily's mother ultimately was awarded over $300,000 as a retroactive payment to compensate her for, protective supervision for the past 15 years. So it was a very
That's incredible.
very gratifying outcome for the family to get them the services they deserved. And they really went through a lot, not just in the appeal process, but just over the past 15 years of this mother having to care for her daughter, who now is an adult. But another aspect that was rewarding about this case is I think it really just highlights an important message for a lot of families, which is that a lot of families, tell me that they're on the fence about appealing their denial and they don't want to go through the process, and it's a headache. And, I totally understand that. And especially because, these families often, they have their hands full, as taking care of their loved ones. So they don't have the interest or the stamina to pursue a case. But I think it really can pay off to keep advocating and appealing for your loved one if you think that he or she deserves more services. Because I've just seen countless times that families who were denied initially, or even multiple times, like in Emily's case, ultimately prevailed. And it's a very important program that provides, as I mentioned, potentially over $5,000 a month to families, which can make such a huge difference in their lives.
Agreed. So I think this just leads us into, you've shared so much great information, and Emily's story is really inspiring. That was a very complicated case, and you helped them get the outcome that was well deserved. And and I'm sure a lot of parents, they just need help getting the services, and it sounds like you're a great resource for them. So what is the best way for our listeners to find you if they are interested in learning more about what you do and getting in touch?
Sure. Probably the best way is going to my website, www.ihsslaw.com. I've tried putting a lot of free resources online for families to take a look at. If you have any questions or if you want help with your case, please give me a call. My number is 213-534-6890. You can also email me, support@ihsslaw.com.
And we'll put all of that stuff in our show
In the
notes
show
too, so
notes.
all of our listeners can they just click it and they're like, oh, I want to talk to James now.
Yeah.
They'll
For
just
sure.
click it.
Yeah, please do. I'd be happy to speak with
Mhm.
everyone, with anyone. There's no charge for, giving me a call to talk about your case. I offer free case evaluations.
Mhm.
Happy to point folks in the right direction. Even if they don't, want to pursue my services. So
Right.
definitely happy to.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
the
thank
hardest
you.
part, I think, for parents is they're afraid. They're afraid to speak up and they're afraid to do those kind of things. But if you have someone like you that's speaking for them, then it's a little bit easier, I think, for
Yeah.
parents.
Yeah. So thank you so much, James. We really appreciate what you're doing and your heart for our families. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, James.